on the Gaia continent, monsters have been mysteriously disappearing for years. At first, everyone thought they were just going extinct or something. But nah, turns out these creatures were actually getting sucked into another freaking dimension. Yeah, wild, right? And funny enough, that exact twist was what one particular mage had been hoping to uncover. This dude had been obsessed with studying the whole monster exodus thing for ages. Still, even after all that digging, he had zero clue about why or how the creatures were jumping worlds. But honestly, he didn't care much about the reason. His main focus was figuring out how to use that power for himself. So, after collecting every little piece of research he could get his hands on, he finally set up a massive magic circle deep inside a dungeon known as the Great Labyrinth. After years of grinding his old ass, it was finally go time. He lined up the coordinates, poured in his mana, and stepped right into the magic circle, ready to make the ultimate leap to another world. A blinding flash erupted around him, lighting up everything like a damn supernova. The spell kicked in bright aura, glowing light, the whole deal. And then boom, nothing, silence. When he came to, he realized something was off. The air felt different. The temperature was weird. But this wasn't another dimension. He was still outside the dungeon. Actually, correction. The dungeon itself had been teleported to another world, leaving him standing in a giant empty hole where it used to be. Talk about an oops moment. Meanwhile, somewhere in that different dimension, a young guy stood frozen in his attic, staring at an interdimensional portal that had just appeared out of nowhere. Up until a few seconds ago, his day had been painfully normal. Kong Jin-hook was just doing his usual work routine, watching college kids rush around, feeling that little sting of nostalgia for his own student days back, when he still had energy and ambition. Now, though, life was way different. As a low-tier hunter, he didn't have time for dreams or fancy goals. His coworker had to literally snap him out of his daydreaming, reminding him they were only halfway done with their shift and couldn't slack off. After a long-ass day, the two finally crashed inside their van. Jin-hook barely had on any warm clothes, even though it was freezing. But hey, perks of being a hunter. Even the weakest ones got boosted tolerance to temperature, which saved him some serious heating cash. Still, the perks didn't pay the bills. The guy was broken as hell and stuck doing random part-time jobs since every big guild hogged all the good hunter work. To make things worse, a local serial killer was out there targeting hunters from top guilds. And now those same guilds are greedily snatching up every single job around. So yeah, Jin-hook's dream of ranking up was looking pretty damn hopeless. But today, things took a sharp turn. Out of nowhere, a loud crash followed by terrified screams echoed from the nearby school. Jackpot chaos like that usually meant monsters, and taking down even a few could score him enough money to chill for an entire year. Except, of course, his luck ran out fast. Just as he rushed in, some guy slammed right into him, knocking him aside while a squad of elite hunters swooped in to handle the scene. The area's main guild titan was already on it, moving fast and clean like pros. Their deputy guild master, Du-yun, snapped at Jin-hook to scram, unless he had a death wish. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. The gap between a broker's D-rank hunter like Jin-hook and an A-rank beast from a major guild was way too wide to cross. With his ambitions crushed yet again, Jin-hook just sighed, dusted himself off, and dragged himself to his next part-time shift, praying it would at least cover a few damn bills. Later that night, when Jin-hook drags himself home, completely weighed down by defeat, he suddenly hears a strange sound echoing from deeper inside his apartment. And that's when things start getting weird, because when he follows the noise, he ends up standing face to face with a freaking portal to another world filled with monsters just casually floating there like it owns the place. The creatures on the other side can't seem to see him at all. And even when he steps closer, nothing happens, which instantly gets his brain spinning, because this might be the break he's been waiting for his whole miserable life. He heads downstairs to gather his thoughts, trying to process the insanity in front of him. And it hits him that this portal is basically a dungeon, the kind people used to think only existed in theory, and if it had appeared anywhere else, he'd be jumping with joy. But since it's right in his damn attic, things just got way more complicated. Reporting it to the Hunter Association would mean they'd take over his place for investigation and boot him out instantly. So, his only real move is to keep it low-key and claim the dungeon for himself. But before that, he needs to confirm whether monsters can cross into his world. Because even though they can't see him, he knows he's barely strong enough to take down 2 or 3 goblins alone. And if an entire group somehow made it through, he'd be completely done for. With nothing left to lose, he takes a deep breath and steps right into the portal, landing on what looks like the first floor of a dungeon maze where he barely gets a second to take in his surroundings before a goblin charges him from the left, swinging a crude club straight at his face, forcing him to dodge and scramble right back into his attic. From there, he watches the goblins stumble around confused, swinging at empty air like it's gone blind, which tells him 2 things. That they can't see the portal from their side, and they definitely can't cross through it either. That realization wipes away every ounce of fear he had, and he grabs a baseball bat, jumps back through the portal, and charges the goblin head-on, swinging with everything he's got, smashing it across the cheek, and sending it flying before stabbing it straight in the chest to finish it off. For the first time ever, he's hunted solo, and with no teammates around, all the experience points are his alone. His level, which had been frozen for 3 years, finally ticks up, and the goblin corpse is now his property, worth a potential 3,000,001 if he plays it smart. The next day, he heads straight to a hunter's market with the body, hoping to cash in. And the merchant takes one look at the poorly handled corpse and instantly realizes this guy's a total newbie because his sloppy kill has already tanked the market value. But even then, Jinhook somehow manages to secure just over 3,000,001, exactly as he'd hoped. Now, all that's left is to provide the location of his hunt for verification. But that's the one piece of info he can't risk revealing. Because if anyone finds out there's a dungeon chilling inside his attic, his little gold mine would vanish faster than that goblin he flattened with a bat. As he's trying to figure out how to escape this new mess, a group of hunters from the Black Dragon Guild suddenly storms in like a pack of starving hyenas looking for their next meal. Apparently, someone dared to steal a kill from their hunting grounds, and they're furious about it. At first, they zero in on Jinhook, ready to pounce. But the merchant quickly points fingers at a clueless blonde-haired hunter standing nearby. And just like that, the poor bastard becomes their new target, getting beaten and interrogated before he can even explain himself, because sneaking into their territory without permission is straight-up suicide. For all the guild knows, this random guy could even be the serial killer they've been tracking. And as they drag his half-conscious body out of the building, Jinhook just stands there, realizing how close he was to being in the blonde dude's shoes. Knowing there's no way he can lie about where the goblin came from, he decides selling here isn't worth the risk. And if he values his life, he'll need to find another way to offload his loot without crossing paths with those big guild psychos ever again. As soon as Jinhook gets back home, he decides it's time to level up. Before he heads back into the dungeon, he arms himself with a teleportation stone for quick escapes back to his apartment, a monster tracking compass with a 50-meter range, and of course his trusty baseball bat. Fully equipped, he steps back into the dungeon for a monster-slaying spree. Each victory ticking up his level by 1. True to its name, the Goblin Labyrinth is packed with goblins, making it the perfect playground for someone at level 2 to grind for experience. After a long day of hunting, his inventory is nearly maxed out. He's got room for just one more goblin. He hopes it'll be a big one for some extra cash. The compass pings, showing a goblin approaching his location. Perfect. All he needs to do is hide and launch a surprise attack. Jinhook positions himself around a corner, waits for the perfect moment, and swings his bat right into the face of a remarkably short man. To Jinhook's horror, it's not a goblin, but a very irate stranger shouting at him in a language he can't understand. Jinhook hurriedly bows an apology, which seems to calm the man down just enough. The stranger pulls 2 necklaces from a bag, hands one to Jinhook, and as soon as Jinhook puts it on, he can suddenly understand every furious word the man is saying. That's when he realizes 2 things. First, the guy has every reason to be mad, having just taken a bat to the face. And second, this isn't just a short man, it's a dwarf, a mythical being he'd only read about in fantasy novels. As the dwarf continues to rant, Jinhook helps pick up the items scattered around, all of which look exceptionally high quality. Unfortunately, he doesn't get a chance to admire them before the dwarf notices his bat and snatches it up, demanding to know where Jinhook got it. Jinhook panically explains it's just an ordinary aluminium baseball bat. But the dwarf seems to think it's made from oracle, a highly prized metal. To the dwarf, this ordinary bat is so valuable that no amount of money could buy it. Instead, he offers Jinhook a trade, some rare items from his own stash in exchange for the bat. Seeing no reason to refuse, Jinhook follows the dwarf back to his workshop, watching as the dwarf takes the bat deeper into the maze of tools and treasures. As Jinhook glances around the workshop, his eyes fall on the various weapons laid out. He can't help but wonder which one he should try to swipe, but the dwarf returns before he can make up his mind. In his hands is Jinhook's newly upgraded baseball bat. For some reason, it's shining bright red and has a slight glow. Jinhook double-checks. Is this really his bat? The dwarf confirms that it's just one of Ulrich Allem's traits. It starts out weak and flimsy, but once enchanted, it becomes incredibly strong and durable. That last word catches Jinhook's attention. Enchanted. Somehow, the dwarf managed to enchant his bat. Testing a few swings, Jinhook notices it feels entirely different from what he remembers. It's almost hard to believe that something this powerful could even exist, let alone be made from an ordinary aluminium bat. He checks his status window, and sure enough, his bat is now classified as a legendary item, boasting S-grade durability and an automatic retrieval feature. Jinhook's once basic bat has turned into an ultra-rare treasure. Selling this would be a jackpot. but the item's bound to him now, so no dice. Still, even if he can't make money off the bat, he can always make some cash with the goblin corpses he's stashed in his inventory. The problem, he can't sell them openly without drawing unwanted attention. His best option is the Hunter Industries black market. They don't ask questions and have a solid setup for dealing with unique inventory. Jin-Hyuk heads home, uses one of the black market business cards, and tracks down a suspicious-looking address. The card screams shady, but it's all he's got. While searching for the entrance, a man named Deputy Cho Hyong calls down to him and invites Jin-Hyuk to meet the boss. The boss, Lee Junil, is a loan shark disguised as a loan agent who also dabbles in monster corpses on the side. When Jin-Hyuk lays out 20 goblin corpses for inspection, the two men are stunned. Despite being a newbie, Jin-Hyuk managed to bring in such a huge haul and in incredible condition too. Well, except for the bashed-in heads. As they're negotiating prices, they're interrupted by a black market merchant rushing in to announce that a monster has shown up nearby. Turns out laying out 20 fresh goblin corpses was like putting up a neon sign for nearby monsters. Worse yet, two orcs definitely out of Jin-Hyuk's league appear, and Jin-Hyuk quickly realizes he has two options: grab his corpses and run, or become orc food. But it's too late. One of the orcs is already swinging a battle axe straight at his head. He dodges the first swing, but the second one's too close. Just when he thinks it's game over, his enchanted bat magically summons itself from his inventory and blocks the attack, sending the orc flying back. Another enchantment presence detection. With this bat, Jin-Hyuk might actually stand a chance. As the orc charges again, Jin-Hyuk, now more confident, goes on the offensive. He smashes the bat down on the orc's knee, disorienting it, and follows up with a strike to its face, snapping its neck instantly. Just like that, his level jumps from 24 to 36. Before he can celebrate, the second orc attacks. This time, he dodges, runs behind it, and slams the bat into its back, then finishes it off with a blow to the head. With the orcs defeated, Jin-Hyuk smirks, turns back to the men, and suggests they add the orc corpses to their deal. That day, he walks away with a spring in his step, having convinced them to pay him 15% above market price. His bank account is now a sight to behold, and thanks to saving the black market crew, he secured a reliable buyer for his future loot. Clearly, the black market guys have realized Jin-Hyuk isn't some low-level thief. They're looking at a hunter strong enough to take down two orcs solo. Even with his legendary bat and newfound strength, though, he knows he'll need better gear to tackle higher-grade monsters. Fortunately, he's got a plan to score his next upgrades, maybe even for free. The next day, Jin-Hyuk shows up with a crate full of beer cans and alcohol for the dwarf, thinking he'd struck gold. After all, the dwarf loves aluminium, so why not beer cans? The dwarf's eyes widen. Seeing the crate full of oracle, he tries a can, only to spit it out immediately. The taste absolutely horrible. To avoid another shouting match, Jin-Hyuk quickly offers him some soju instead. The dwarf takes a swig, and while he's mildly satisfied, there's clearly room for improvement. Jin-Hyuk can sense it. The dwarf is looking for that extra kick. Taking advantage of the moment, the dwarf gives Jin-Hyuk a new quest. Mine some Mithril, or what does Mithril have to do with alcohol? Who knows? But Jin-Hyuk wants free gear, so he's in. He dives deeper into the labyrinth, emerging at a large forest clearing on the second floor. A menu pops up, telling him he can record this location as a warp point. Jin-Hyuk has no idea what a warp point is, but accepts anyway, creating a portal to travel between floors. He ventures further, reaching the second floor, ominously called Dogs and Skeletons. Immediately, monster dogs leap at him. Compared to the orcs he fought before, these are nothing more than free XP. He swings his bat with abandon, wiping out 25 of them and collecting their corpses. That haul alone should net him a solid 200 million won. Tempting as the money is, he has to stay focused on his mission, mining that mythol, or, as he journeys deeper, skeletons start appearing. Since skeletons can't be sold and must be destroyed by breaking their core, Jin-Hyuk realizes why the dwarf sent him instead of going himself. Skeletons are an absolute pain to deal with, but they do help boost his level to 100, unlocking a new class. Expecting a berserker or warrior class after all the fighting he's done, he's shocked to find out he's been designated a cleric. After dispatching the skeletons, he finally collects the mythol. The dwarf, who doubted he'd make it back alive, seems impressed. As a reward, he offers to forge anything Jin-Hyuk wants. Already armed with a legendary bat, Jin-Hyuk requests lightweight armor that can still withstand heavy hits. The dwarf gets to work, and Jin-Hyuk heads home for a well-deserved nap. A few hours later, he returns to find the dwarf ready with a new piece mythol chainmail. It's designed to fit snugly under his shirt and hoodie, making it the perfect hidden armor. To demonstrate, the dwarf smacks Jin-Hyuk in the chest with a hammer, an attack that would have normally broken a rib or two, but Jin-Hyuk barely feels it. With this armor and his enchanted bat, his combat skills have skyrocketed. Meeting this dwarf was definitely the lucky break he'd been waiting for. But the dwarf isn't done. He hands Jin-hook a large barrel of soju made from the myethil or Jin-hook brought back. Jin-hook takes it home to try and discovers the dwarf was right. The myethil barrel has transformed the soju into something completely unique. With this in hand, he contacts the black market dealer again, offering not only cobalt corpses, but now also premium quality liquor. Meanwhile, in another part of town, the Titan Guild is finishing a training session when an unexpected anomaly gate opens, spewing hordes of lizardmen. The deputy guild master, Du Yun, stubbornly refuses to call for backup, pushing his team to hold the line on their own. Jin-hook, however, is having a much better day. His cleric class is now officially registered, and he's been promoted from D rank to C rank. Given that clerics are rare and highly sought after by top guilds, he's excited about the new opportunities. Just then, a bloodied hunter bursts in, desperate for a cleric's help. Jin-hook volunteers and is taken to the site where Titan Guild members are locked in battle with the lizardmen. He's instructed to stay in the back and heal as many people as he can. Jin-hook wants to jump in on the action, but the guild member assures him that healing is all he needs to do, and he'll be handsomely paid once the fight is over. The healer's presence is enough to keep the guild members fighting, but the waves of lizard men are relentless. One of the other clerics suggests calling a support guild for backup as the odds are starting to look grim. Just as Jin-hook is considering their next move, he senses a hostile presence behind him. His trusty bat saves him from a near-fatal blow delivered by a sneaky lizard man who somehow bypassed all the hunters, aiming straight for the healers. Realizing that the rear defense has been breached, Jin-hook swings his bat, sending the attacker flying. He quickly warns the other clerics about the breach, understanding that he's the only one who can hold them off. The monsters must have used the concealment technique to slip through, planning to ambush the healers from behind. Jin-hook instructs the clerics to focus on healing and leave the lizard men to him. The other clerics look at him with concern, and they think he's just another ordinary healer like them. But Jin-hook charges in, reassuring them with the confidence he's only kind of feeling himself. In reality, he's nervous, but he manages to hold his ground against the onslaught. At one point, a lizard man slips past his guard and lunges for another cleric. Jin-hook bolts after it, leaping just in time to intercept the attack. He lands a rush blow, but leaves himself open for a stab from behind. Thankfully, the dwarf's chainmail armor absorbs the impact, leaving the monster in shock when its attack doesn't work. Jin-hook seizes the moment, countering with a solid swing to the creature's face, managing to hold the line and allowing the clerics to focus solely on healing. Suddenly, the lizardmen freeze as a powerful figure joins the fray, a man who takes down one of the monsters with a single punch. It's Seo Sango, the Titan Guild master himself. He nods at Jin-hook and asks if he was the one who took down all the monsters in the area. Jin-hook, a bit confused about who this powerhouse is, admits he was handling things here. The clerics are baffled. How could he not recognize Sango, the infamous S-rank hunter? With no time to spare, Sanho heads back into battle, promising to reward Jin-hook for his help later. As soon as he steps in, his presence immediately raises everyone's spirits. Everyone except Du Yun, who's clearly irritated. Sango takes charge without hesitation, barking orders and commanding attention from all the hunters. With the area cleared, he unleashes a powerful shockwave attack that sends the lizard men flying. In mere moments, Sango has wiped out the remaining monsters. Satisfied that his guild members are now safe, Sango turns to Du Yun, grabbing him by the jacket to reprimand him. What was he thinking? Risking his life and the lives of everyone else like that. Du Yun claims he just wanted to protect the guild's reputation. But Sango sees through him. It's not about the guild, is it? It's about his pride. Their tense standoff is broken when one of the guild members reminds Sango to dismiss the clerics who helped secure the area. Sanho composes himself and addresses the hunters, thanking them for their efforts, especially Jin-hook, who played a key role in keeping everyone alive. As a gesture of gratitude, Sanho invites Jin-hook to join the Titan Guild directly. Skipping the usual registration process, Du Yun can't hold back, immediately stepping in to belittle Jin-hook as just a dank who got lucky. Sango snaps back loudly. He reminds that these mere dank saved countless lives that would have been lost without his determination. Sango then forces Du Yun to apologize, delivering a heavy blow to his pride. However, Jin-hook declines the offer. He's not interested in joining a guild where people like Du Yun hold authority. That's the final straw for Du Yun, who lunges at Jin-hook with an enhanced punch, only to be met by Jin-hook's bat squarely in the stomach. The blow knocks him out cold, and the scene soon makes headlines, sparking quite a buzz in the local news. The next day, the higher-ups of the Titan Guild are seething over what happened to Du Yun. Not only was he publicly embarrassed by a mere C rank, but he was also demoted from his position as deputy guild master. They demand that this C rank show up before them to explain himself. However, Sango, the guild master Aster, isn't having any of it. He points out that Dian not only put multiple guild members at risk for the sake of his pride, but also attempted to attack someone who fought for their guild. That's more than enough reason for a demotion in Sanho's eyes. This comment shuts the gathered crowd down, leaving them with nothing to say. Sanho sends them on their way, but his thoughts wander back to the extraordinary C rank he witnessed the other day. Before he grows any stronger, he must get Kong Jin-hook to join his guild no matter what. Jin-hook was chilling in his apartment, sprawled on the couch with a drink in hand, lazily checking his spending habits. Since his last hunting spree brought in a ton of cash, he'd gone overboard with expenses, and now things were looking wild. If he'd known it had turned out like this, he probably would have taken that extra pay the Titan Guild offered him. Still, he didn't really care. He had better ways to make money. Anyway, after some much-needed downtime, he hopped back into the dungeon, ready to stack more monster corpses for cash. But hunting the same old weak monsters wasn't cutting it anymore. Now that he'd powered up, he craved tougher fights. So, he pushed deeper into the second floor, only to stumble into a small army of orcs waiting for him. One tried to sneak from behind, but Jin-hook smoothly dodged and countered, dropping the orc in a single hit. As more swarmed in, he couldn't help but think that a few days ago, this would have been game over for him. Thanks to his new gear, though, he handled them like it was nothing. And soon, 20 orc corpses were lying at his feet, enough loot to keep him set for a year. Still feeling fired up, he ventured deeper, stepping into the third floor, known as the Temple Guardian's Labyrinth. It looked empty at first, but the palm shattered when the ground began shaking violently. A giant stone hand erupted from below, and Jin-hook barely dodged in time. The hand belonged to a stone golem made of pure mana. Fast, heavy, and way too strong. Even blocking its hits sent him staggering backward. Realizing it was dumb but powerful, he aimed for its head and shattered it clean, only to watch it start reforming. That's when it hit him. Golems only die when their core is destroyed. Before he could regroup, the monster's arm regenerated and grabbed him mid-escape. Just when he thought he was done for, an arrow zipped through the air and nailed the golem right in the chest. Seizing the moment, Jin-hook dashed in, jabbed through its back, cracked the core, and ended the fight for good. Turning around to thank his savior, he expected that dwarf from before. But instead, standing there was a stunning elf woman with long pointed ears and a look that could kill. Before he could even speak, she stormed over, grabbed his collar, and started grilling him about who he was and where he came from. She clearly wasn't from his world. His outfit alone had her confused. After bombarding him with questions, she finally eased up when he mentioned he just entered the dungeon today. Her eyes widened as she shoved him down, shouting that he knew the way out. Dropping her bow, she looked half crazy, half relieved, claiming she'd finally found a way to escape. Jin-hook, still dazed, tried to ask what the hell was going on, but she ignored him completely and demanded that he guide her out. He rolled his eyes, thinking she was way too pushy, but damn, she was pretty, so he let it slide. She promised him a huge reward for helping her, bragging that she was a platinum-ranked mercenary and totally trustworthy, introducing herself as Lucia, a half-elf with a reputation. She was shocked when Jin-hook admitted he'd never heard of her. When she flashed her badge, he still looked clueless, making her ask if he was from some countryside dump. "I'm from Seoul, Korea," he replied flatly, and her face went blank. She realized right then that a crazy mage might have actually succeeded with a dimensional hop spell. According to her, a mage from her world cast some experiment that ended up pulling this entire dungeon into his dimension. It sounded insane to Jin-hook, but it lined up with everything that felt off. If the dungeon returned to its original world, it could screw him over completely. When he asked if she planned to send it back, she said it wasn't possible to reverse the magic here. It was way too complex. But there might be a hidden room on this floor that could help. One she'd found long ago while searching for an exit. She asked for his help getting there, promising a solid reward in return. Since the deal didn't sound half bad, Jin-hook decided to tag along, because honestly, this weirdest adventure had just started getting interesting. As they kept moving through the dungeon, cutting down a few stray orcs along the way, Jin-hook couldn't help but realize that Lucia was way stronger than he first assumed. That arrow she'd fired earlier wasn't just some lucky shot. It packed serious power. And honestly, fighting her here would have been suicide. His best play was to stay chill, cooperate with her, and keep observing how she handled things. After trekking for a while, they decided to take a breather at a safe spot. Jin-hook had stashed a few emergency chocolates in his pocket, so he handed one to her, thinking it would be a nice gesture. Turns out she loved it a little too much before he knew it. She devoured his entire stash like a crazed maniac, and was still asking for more. Unfortunately, that was all he had left, but she looked satisfied enough to keep going, so he figured they were good for now. Eventually, They reached a massive chamber that housed the dungeon's boss, and Lucia was convinced the mag's spell they were looking for might be hidden in there somewhere. The only problem, it was guarded by the boss itself. She told him not to stress too much, just to back her up once she took the big guy down so they could access the sealed room. The moment they stepped inside, the monster roared loud enough to shake the walls and charged straight at them. Lucia didn't even flinch. She pulled back her bow, energy crackling around her as she shouted for him to watch closely. Channeling something called aura, she fired an arrow that smashed straight into the boss's chest, sending it crashing onto its back like a rag doll. One hit from her was enough to drop that massive armored beast. Yeah, she was definitely showing off. Now, it was Jinhuk's turn to finish the job before the thing recovered. Remembering how golems work, he knew the core was the weak point, so he leapt onto the monster's chest and swung his bat right where he thought it'd be. The first hit didn't do much, and before he could go again, a huge fist came flying from the side. He barely blocked it, activating his cleric skill, Holy Shield, just in time, and using the recoil to spring himself right back onto the creature's chest. If one hit wasn't enough, then fine, he'd just keep smashing until it stopped moving. After a few solid blows, the bat finally broke through, cracking the core wide open and ending the fight for good. His level shot up again, almost reaching 200, and he could feel the raw power rushing through him. When it was all over, he turned to Lucia and asked her to teach him how to use aura like she did. But the funny thing was, he had already used it without realizing. His shield skill had transformed his holy cleric power into aura on its own. Lucia had no clue what kind of skill that was. But seeing his potential, she figured he could probably learn to control aura way faster than she expected, maybe even start enhancing his attacks right away. Still, before she'd agree to teach him properly, she gave him one simple condition. Go back and bring her more chocolates. Meanwhile, back in the city, Sango walked alongside his secretary, Lee Hyena, discussing a new anomaly that had appeared near Gangnam Station. It was detected yesterday, which meant they had about 5 days to prepare before a powerful monster crashed the party. No matter how Sango pictured it, there was no way his guild was going to handle this one alone. However, all the other major guilds have been dispatched overseas, leaving the Titan Guild as the only one left in Korea to fight. Hyena continued searching for capable hunters who were freelancing locally, but none of them seemed reliable. Sango, however, already had his sights set on someone else, and coincidentally, that someone just happened to be crossing the street. He excused himself from the conversation with his secretary and ran after Jinhuk, who was carrying home a large box of snacks the elf had asked him to get. When the guild master called out to him, Jinhuk turned, listening as Sanho made another proposal for him to join the Titan Guild, but Jinhuk had no plans to change his mind. Seeing that, Sango offered him a compromise, a job as a mercenary, so he could still work for the guild without being a part of it. The rewards sounded substantial, which caught Jinhuk's attention, but he only promised to think about it. He later returned to the dungeon and presented the snacks to the elf, who happily devoured them all. It was clear that her world didn't have this kind of food. After her hearty meal, Jinhuk asked why she was eating down in the basement when they'd already defeated the boss monster. She pointed up at a magic circle on the ceiling and explained that it connected the dungeon to the world he lived in. Because of this, she would be staying there for the time being to study it. And if he wanted to learn more about aura, he'd better bring her more chocolates. Once she finished eating, she took his hand to teach him how to use aura. The first step was for her to pour her own aura into his body so he could feel what it was like. As Jinhuk felt the power flowing through him, Lucia noticed a sudden spike of energy. It seemed he had more talent for this than she initially expected. The movement of holy power coursing through him was impressive enough that she believed he'd grasped the basics by the end of the day. She commended him for his natural talent and asked if he could remember the flow of aura in his body. He confidently assured her he could, and she acknowledged it with a nod before turning to leave the dungeon. She mentioned that she was supposed to investigate the magic circle first, but decided it would be faster to train him on how to use aura, and the best way to do that was through practical experience. She then took him to a different part of the dungeon and tossed him straight into a horde of monsters. He managed to hold his own while collecting their corpses. Turning to Lucia, he questioned why he was fighting an army of monsters when she had said he'd be learning how to use aura. Lucia's expression made it clear she believed this was the best way to learn, even though she had infused a bit of mana into his body so he could feel it. She told him the rest he'd have to sense on his own by activating aura through his holy power. There was no better way to build instinct than in the middle of real combat. As they battled, the ground started to shake and a stone golem emerged from the earth. The creature let out a deafening roar and pushed Jinhuk back as Lucia explained that he needed to face a true crisis to unlock his potential. She told him to focus and try to feel the holy power coming from the shield he'd generated with his skill. Since the shield itself was made of aura, mastering it would come faster that way. Easier said than done, especially since he didn't even consciously activate the holy shield. He wondered how he was supposed to feel aura from something that turned on automatically. The monster suddenly brought down its massive fist toward him, and he barely managed to block it with the holy shield again. But this time he felt a strange energy gathering around his left hand, the one that had activated the skill. This must be what holy power felt like. The golem attacked again, and Jinhook summoned his holy shield once more, but this time it looked different, and the sensation of summoning it wasn't the same. He suspected this must be mana. However, before he could think further, the golem smashed down on the shield, sending him flying back. For a platform, Lucha mocked him, saying she told him to get the hang of his skill, not to make foolish mistakes. Jinhook gritted his teeth, realizing he was doing exactly what she'd told him to do. As he steadied himself for another attack, a status window suddenly appeared before him. He had acquired a new skill, Holy Power Application. It allowed him to use Holy Power to enhance both attack and defense, depending on how much power was used. That revelation made him pause. There were actually ways to gain skills beyond just a job change. Lucia noticed him spacing out and decided to step in, saying that facing a golem while learning aura might be too much for him. She was ready to handle it herself, but Jinhu quickly recovered, telling her to stand down. Now that he had a grasp on his new power, he was confident he could handle it. He charged at the golem, leaping into the air to narrowly dodge another stone fist aimed right at him. While midair, he focused his mana on the bat, used a front flip to gain more momentum, and brought the mana-enhanced bat crashing down onto the golem's head. The monster fell, but he wasn't done yet. Landing on its chest, he concentrated again, channeling even more mana into his bat before slamming it down on the creature's core. In that moment, he unlocked a new skill, Holy Aura. With his enhanced weapon, he stabbed the golem and shattered its core, unlocking not only his Holy Aura, but also gaining new skills like Precision Strike and Unyielding. Thanks to Lucia's brutal training, he had unlocked 2 passive skills and an active one. Lucia, however, was more stunned by how quickly he learned to use aura in battle. She had only intended to teach him the basics and be done with it. But now she knew she had to see this through to the end. She drew one of her arrows and brought down a wall, opening the area to an even larger horde of monsters. Jinhook was far from impressed, but he readied his bat anyway and prepared for another fight, bracing himself as he muttered inwardly that, here they go again. The battle with the monsters in the dungeon drained Jinhook completely, and by the time he went to sell the monster corpses, he looked like he had just crawled out of a war zone. When he arrived at the black market, the boss, Jean Cole, immediately noticed his exhausted state. Choosing not to ask too many questions, Jean Cho got straight to business, accepting the corpses and bringing up the topic of the alcohol Jinhook had sold last time. Marketed as traditional artisan soju, the drink had exploded in popularity with orders flooding in ever since it hit the market. The thought made Jinhook pause. If he focused solely on selling liquor, he could probably live comfortably without ever worrying about money again. With that comforting realization, enough savings to last a lifetime and a small business already set up, Jinhook headed home to rest. His training with Lucia had left him completely worn out, and the moment his head hit the pillow, he passed out instantly. Not long after, he was jolted awake by the blaring sound of a disaster alert. A loud automated voice echoed through the streets, urging everyone to evacuate and get to safety. It was the day of the monster invasion, though it had arrived earlier than expected this month. Normally, these invasions happen at random, but there was one that occurred regularly every month. This particular invasion wasn't unusual, and under normal circumstances, Jinhook would have used it as a chance to hunt low-level monsters for some quick cash. This time, though, he was too damn try to care. The large guilds would handle anyway, or so he thought. That was until a new notification popped up on his phone, announcing that due to the urgency of the situation, the rewards for defeating monsters were now tripled. Tripled. At that point, there was no way Jinhook could ignore it. He grabbed his gear and stepped out into the street to see what he could take down for some quick profit. Around him, security officials were shouting orders and trying to clear civilians from the area. While the Titan Guild fought hordes of monsters charging through the city, the security line was breaking fast, and Sango was running out of stamina, trying to hold the line. No matter how many monsters he cut down, more just kept pouring in. The guild members were already at their limits. Even though it looked like they were holding the upper hand, things weren't looking good. From a safe distance, the guild's secretary watched the chaos unfold with worry. Everything seemed fine thanks to the guild master's leadership, but she could tell they were being stretched thin. If only they had one stronger hunter to turn the tide. Her thoughts drifted to a man Senho had recently shown interest in, someone he believed had potential. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and called Jinhook. At that moment, Jinhook was busy fighting goblins when he answered. The secretary quickly offered him a chance to join the Titan Guild for the battle, promising generous compensation in return. Jin-hook wasn't easily swayed and demanded 5 times the usual pay. She told him to meet her at a predetermined location to discuss further. When they met, she offered him 4 times the normal rate instead. He wasn't thrilled, but eventually agreed. She handed him a device that would track how many monsters he killed, explaining that it would record his contribution to the guild. If his performance exceeded the average, he'd get the full reward he asked for, with a real opportunity to show off his strength and get paid fairly. Jin-hook took off toward the battlefield. The secretary watched him go, unsure if he'd live up to the expectations Sango had placed on him. After all, the only time he had taken down Du Yun was by pure luck. No one really knew how capable he truly was. As soon as he arrived, Jin-hook spotted a rampaging ogre and charged at it without hesitation. In a single powerful strike, he brought it down, leaving everyone around him stunned. The crowd started whispering, assuming he must be at least an A-rank hunter. Jin-hook smirked to himself. Maybe a rank was close, but with his current abilities, he figured he was already stronger than that. He drank a mana potion to recharge and steadied himself. Thanks to Lukia's brutal training, he had reached level 200. Normally, there was no way someone like him could handle an ogre. But as long as his mana didn't run out, he was confident he could go toe-to-toe with S-rank hunters. With over 1,500 mana potions in stock, every monster in the area basically looked like free money to him. Elsewhere, Du Yun was fighting alongside his guild members when he noticed the monsters around them thinning out fast. Curious, he turned to see what was happening and spotted a small crowd watching someone tear through the beast like it was nothing. When he saw who it was, his expression twisted. It was Jin-hook. Anger flared instantly. He barked at his guild mates to stop gawking and get back to fighting, but his focus was locked on Jin-hook. Why the hell was this guy here? And who invited him? The memory of their last encounter, the one that got broadcast all over the news, still burned in his mind. That humiliation was something he hadn't forgotten. Last time must have been pure luck, he thought. But this time, he'd make sure to crush him properly. Determined to put Jin-hook back in his place, Du Yun charged straight toward him, but Jin-hook saw him coming a mile away. With precise timing, Jin-hook countered, sending Du Yun flying and knocking him out cold before he even got the chance to strike. Sorry, not today, Jin-hook muttered under his breath, brushing off the dust and the commotion. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, Sango was struggling against a rampaging miner. His mana was nearly depleted, and he was running out of stamina fast. The beast raised its massive club for a killing blow, and for a split second, Sango considered retreating just to catch his breath. But before the hit could land, a powerful force struck from behind. Jin-hook came soaring down from above, grabbing the Minotaur by its horn and slamming it hard into the ground. For a C-rank hunter to take down a monster like that in a single hit was absurd. Sango couldn't help but grin. His judgment about Jin-hook had been right all along. As the monster fell, Sango approached to thank him, but Jin-hook brushed it off, saying that hyena had called him and promised a hefty reward for his help, so there was no need for gratitude. Sango chuckled and decided to take the opportunity to make another offer, telling him that if he joined their guild, opportunities like this would keep coming. Jin-hook took a moment to consider it, then simply replied that once they finished cleaning up the remaining monsters, he'd think about it. As they talk, Sanho receives a call from Hyena. She tells him to look at the sky where the clouds have turned black and the weather has become fiery, crackling with lightning. Something huge and menacing lurks among the clouds, and it does not appear friendly. The creature shoots lightning down at everything, targeting both monsters and hunters while damaging buildings as it flies overhead. It's so high in the sky that their skills can't reach it, leaving them with no way to attack. Sango suggests returning to his guild to assess the situation and invites Jin-hook to join him. Reluctantly, Jin-hook agrees and they reconvene in his office. They run various tests only to find that nothing they've done so far can affect the creature or defend against its attacks. Every attempt to stop it has been nullified or destroyed. They realize they need something with immense firepower capable of long-range destruction. Lucia immediately comes to Jin-hook's mind, and he recognizes that there may be a way to bring it down after all. As Jin-hook leaves to fetch Luca, the executives of the Titan Guild gather to discuss Sango's apparent favoritism toward the C-ranker. The other guild members brainstorm alternative methods to defeat the monster without relying on Jin-hook, but they find themselves with no other choice. All other strategies are guaranteed to fail, leaving them with only the option to trust the one hunter with a plan. They consider calling the Good Guild, a large group filled with a rank and higher mages. But no, they don't care about casualties. Inviting them would likely lead to many deaths. The room falls silent as they acknowledge their limited options. Meanwhile, Jin-hook emerges from the portal with Lucia, thanking her for agreeing to help and promising her as many sweet treats as she desires in return. They ascend to the top of the Titan Guild headquarters where Jin-hook shows her the monster, terrorizing their city. He asks if she can take it down, and she confidently assures him that she can. The monster is so large that she could hit it with her eyes closed. It's a level 300 creature, the highest ever recorded, and she says she can eliminate it. But first, she needs some assistance. The building's roof can't withstand her power, so she asks Jin-hook to prepare a shield to absorb most of the impact. Not wanting to see multiple buildings destroyed, Jin-hook calls the guild leader to inform him about the potential damage once they take down the monster. Sango tells him not to worry about collateral damage and to focus solely on bringing the creature down. With that settled, Jin-hook prepares the shield while Lucia charges 2 arrows to strike the beast. She aims carefully and releases the arrows, creating a massive shockwave that pushes Jin-hook back. Even with the shield, the 2 shots soar through the sky and land a direct hit on the monster, obliterating half its body from the impact. The Titan Guild watches in awe on the ground, amazed that Jin-hook managed to pull it off so effortlessly. Meanwhile, Jin-hook is impressed the whiplash from Lucia's attack leaves smoking trails on the building's helipad. While it wasn't the time to hold back, this was excessive. Lucia, on the other hand, is disappointed that the monster was so weak, attributing her ease in defeating it to her immense strength. Regardless, the job is done, and it's time for her to head back. She hands Jin-hook a tracker that monitors his points, showing a staggering 240 points. Before leaving, she warns him not to place too much trust in others, especially when money is at stake, because people's minds tend to cloud with greed. She advises him to be wary, as she has learned from her many adventures. Jin-hook assures her he'll be fine and will handle anything that seems off. They part ways, and he heads down to the street, where he's met by Sango and his secretary. They catch up with him and ask how he managed to take down such a formidable monster alone. Jin-hook politely declines to share, calling a secret. One of the executives is offended and doesn't believe a mere sinker could defeat such a giant beast. However, Jin-hook shows them the monster tracker, displaying a substantial number of points, proving he indeed took it down. Sango stops the executive there and apologizes to Jin-hook for the outburst. The executive watches in anger, feeling Sango favors a C ranker over his guild members. He decides it's time for a change as Sango is hindering the guild's future. He pulls out his phone and dials an unknown number. By the next day, rumors spread throughout the city that an ordinary C ranker had defeated the giant monster. Members of the Titan Guild were skeptical, but verifying the information wasn't too difficult. Word also circulated that the guild master Aster had personally offered Jin-hook direct entry into the Titan Guild, which he turned down. He must have been confident in his skills to reject such a significant offer from Sanho himself. The rumors even reached the Ultron Guild, who learned that Du Yun had been hospitalized after the monster invasion. Known for his impressive skills, it was revealed that he had been defeated by the rumored C-rank hunter. If this was true, then the rumors held some weight. The Ultron Guild scouts decided to meet with Jin-hook to verify the information. They suspected he might have unlocked a hidden class, which was exceptionally rare for hunters. If that was the case, they needed to recruit him into their guild before another one took him or eliminate him. Meanwhile, Jin-hook slept soundly after the battle. Having exhausted all his stamina, he passed out as soon as he got the chance and woke up 2 days later. Realizing the toll of overexertion, he walked into his living room and found that Lucia had created a massive mess with all the snacks he had bought her. She had managed to eat everything in just 2 days. With no food left in the fridge, her only option had been to consume the snacks. Since he hadn't opened the portal for her, she couldn't return to the dungeon. This confused Jin-hook, as he had never needed to open the portal before. It had always been accessible. He headed to the attic to show her that the portal was indeed open, but it didn't make sense to her since there had been nothing there moments ago. She instructed him to step away from the door, then reopened it, revealing that there was nothing there now that he had stepped back. Jin-hook was baffled since he had only ever seen the dungeon open. Lucia theorized that the dungeon responded only to him, suggesting it was imprinted directly on him, meaning it could have fallen on his head. Luckily, it was a failed spell. He decided not to dwell on it and instead ordered food for both of them. Lucia then wondered how he had found his way back to the house after they defeated the monster. She explained that she had placed a recognition suppression spell on it, which should have made it impossible to locate. Jin-hook asked why she would cast such a spell on his house. Lucia revealed that strange individuals from a guild named Ultron had been visiting while he slept, which annoyed her enough to ensure they could never return. Jin-hook was perplexed as to why those large guilds would be searching for him. He pulled out his phone to discover what had happened during his slumber. The first headline he saw grabbed his attention. News of him defeating the giant monster had gone viral. A video was circulating that clearly showed him fighting alongside the Titan Guild, and it seemed he had become famous overnight. This newfound attention was problematic. His greed in using Lucia's power had placed him under spotlight. The hunter industry was territorial, and strong competitors were swiftly eliminated. He resolved not to dwell on the past. With Lucia done eating, they returned to the dungeon to deliver their loot to the dwarf. Thanks to Lucia's powerful shot, the monster's body was too damaged to salvage, leaving them only with its head. The old man was frustrated with Lucia for overdoing it and ruining valuable material, revealing a natural animosity between them. Jinhuk interrupted their argument and asked the dwarf if he could craft something from the corpse. The dwarf dug out an organ from the head, which allowed it to produce lightning. With that, Jinhyuk could enchant his baseball bat to create lightning as well. He inquired how the dwarf would like to be compensated, but the dwarf simply wanted Lucia to leave his workshop. Angered, Lucia began shaking with rage, and Jinhyuk had to calm her down by promising more sweets. After barely preventing her from shooting a hole through the dwarf's head, he headed back into the city to buy her the promised treats. On his way back home, Jinhyuk sensed something lurking in an alleyway. It seemed like someone was tracking him. With a quick flick, he dropped his groceries behind a wall and called out to whoever was following him. The hidden presence was startled that Jinhyuk had noticed him at all. Suddenly, a figure appeared out of nowhere and rushed at him, swinging a sword. Jinhyuk barely managed to block the attack with his bat. The newcomer was astonished that Jinhyuk could even see him, which confirmed the rumors that Jinhyuk was more than just an ordinary sea ranker. Determined to prove his strength, Jinhyuk pushed the attacker back and leapt at him for a counterattack. Since the attacker clearly wanted to keep his identity a secret, Jinhyuk decided he would just have to beat some sense out of him until he talked. However, the attacker had a different plan. He used a skill to turn himself invisible. Jinhyuk could just faintly feel his presence enough to dodge and block most of the attacks, but he knew he couldn't keep that up forever. If only he had his usual bat, but the old dwarf was still working on it. Stuck with a regular aluminium bat, he thought it was going to be a long day. Realizing he needed to make a run for it, he tried to escape. Just as he moved, the hooded attacker attached a tracking device to his shirt. Jinhyuk sprinted toward a crowded area, hoping to hide, but the device allowed the attacker to track his every move. The trail led to a bathroom in a department store. He muttered to himself that it was the perfect place to hide. Camouflaging himself, he kicked open a stall door, ready to pounce, except there was nothing there but the tracker stuck to the wall. He realized it was a bathroom trap, and at that exact moment, the assassin realized he'd been played. Frustrated, the assassin charged up a fireball, aiming straight at Jinhyuk and a poor kid who just wanted to use the toilet. With no time to spare, Jinhyuk threw up a shield to protect them both. The assassin used the smoke as cover to escape. Jinhyuk sighed, annoyed that there had been a fireball and a runaway. Just as he tried to catch his breath, an object suddenly pierced through the assassin's chest, killing him instantly. Shocked, Jinhyuk blinked in surprise, realizing he hadn't meant to kill him. As he lamented the situation, a status window popped up in front of him. It acknowledged the kill, but labeled it as self-defense, which came as a relief, though he still could have done without the drama. Before he could process it further, two detectives approached him, asking questions about the incident. He cooperated, explaining that he had just been minding his own business when chaos erupted. Luckily, since he hadn't received the villain trait, the detectives didn't suspect him of foul play. They confirmed he was acting in self-defense and let him go, though not before warning him not to mention the words murder, self-defense, or villain. They handed him a device that would monitor his every word. Jinhyuk muttered under his breath about having a babysitter as they let him go. As he headed home, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he had become the center of attention in the hunter community. Meanwhile, the detectives speculated among themselves, noting how he had managed to block a powerful attack while protecting a child and had even taken down a high-level hunter. They whispered that there was no way this guy was just a C rank and hoped he wouldn't do anything to lose their trust. Back at home, Jinhyuk checked out his new class, the Inquisitor. It seemed to build off his cleric abilities, but with a twist. His skills were now more self-focused, allowing him to act like a tank while healing himself. On top of that, he gained the ability to see the karma of others. He found it ironic that he could now literally judge people and shook his head with a smirk. Excited to test out his new powers, he returned to the dwarf's workshop. As promised, his weapon had been enchanted to send out lightning attacks. All he had to do was think about it, and it would release up to 3 charged lightning blasts. He chuckled, already envisioning the chaos he could unleash. However, Lucia wasn't as impressed. She looked concerned, saying she couldn't sense any holy power from him anymore, and asked what he had done in the human world. Jinhyuk simply shrugged, explaining that he couldn't share much because of the monitoring device. The dwarf, who overheard, offered to dispose of the device if Jinhyuk completed a simple task to retrieve an item from a dangerous location using a compass he provided. Jinhyuk grinned, thinking it sounded like a fun day. This little errand dragged him to a treacherous mountainous path that seemed to defy all logic. Steep cliffs, impossible terrain, and death traps everywhere. Who in their right mind would come here willingly? And yet here he was, armed with nothing but basic hiking gear, rappelling down what looked like a bottomless pit. All this effort just to mine some ores. That old dwarf really had no shame, sending him into a death trap over shiny rocks. Meanwhile, Lucia was having the time of her life. While Jinhook wrestled with his gear and tried not to fall to his doom, she leaned back casually, watching his struggle like it was prime entertainment. Amused by his efforts, she teased him, wondering if he was really struggling this much just to go down. From her perspective, this was nothing, and she made sure he knew it. If he wanted to make it out in one piece, he had one job: follow her lead, stick to her instructions, and under no circumstances act on his own, unless he wanted to experience a tragic yet slightly comedic death. Then, as if to prove how easy it really was, she took a step forward and jumped. No ropes, no hesitation, just a confident leap into the abyss. Jinhook barely had time to react before she was already scaling down the rock face with nothing but her hands, landing effortlessly like she'd done this 100 times before. Of course, she had a total show-off. Jinhook sighed, knowing full well he couldn't just do what she did, at least not without breaking a few bones in the process. Taking a deep breath, he loosened his grip on the rope and muttered to himself before letting go. The moment he free fell, adrenaline flooded his system. The wind roared past his ears, and for a second, doubt crept in. But as he neared the bottom, instinct took over. Using his hands and legs, he braced against the rocky walls, slowing himself down just enough to land beside Lucia, completely unscathed. She barely looked impressed. Arms crossed, she raised a brow and remarked that it had taken him long enough. Taking a break in the middle of their mission, they settled on a steep cliff, gazing at the endless landscape below. The conversation naturally drifted toward what had happened outside. Removing the device might get Jinhook in trouble, but the old dwarf had been oddly confident about it, saying it would be fine. That meant there had to be a way. For all his grumpy outbursts, that blacksmith was undeniably talented. Shifting the conversation, Lucia's curiosity turned to something else: karma values, specifically the ones tied to Jinhook's new class. She asked about her own level, and after a quick check, he informed her that she had 82, the highest among the three of them. Jinhook himself sat at 64, while the old dwarf had 72. The numbers didn't surprise her. Considering the life she had led, it made sense that she had the highest karma. She had done everything she could just to survive. Even so, the difference between her and Jinhook was only 20 points, and he had only killed one person so far. Lucia, on the other hand, had long since lost count. That thought led her to an interesting comparison. In the world she used to live in, there had been saints beings who could distinguish good from evil with just a glance. Jinhook immediately dismissed the idea that he was anything close to a saint, and Lucia agreed without hesitation. That wasn't her point, though. She was merely saying that the ability to gauge evil existed across different worlds. Not that she cared much about it right now. Truthfully, she had little interest in wasting time searching for a mind just to satisfy the old fart. What interested her, however, were Jinhook's new abilities. She was eager to analyze them thoroughly. When he asked why she was so invested, she simply shrugged and said that she found him entertaining. And she wasn't wrong. Watching him figure things out was much more interesting than staying holed up in an abandoned dungeon. They needed a better way to understand karma values. And Lucia had a simple solution: go outside and run some real experiments. Jinhook hesitated. He felt bad about pausing their mission for the old man. But Lucia had a point. Staying in the dungeon with just the two of them wouldn't give him any deeper understanding of his abilities. After a brief moment of contemplation, he reached into his pocket. Even if he felt a little guilty about ditching the dwarf's request, his curiosity won out. Fishing out a return stone, he held it between his fingers. This particular stone had been set to instantly transport him to a predetermined location outside. With a firm squeeze, he crushed it. A dimensional rift split open right where they stood. Lucia barely had a second to react before she was swallowed up by the portal, her momentary surprise vanishing into the void. Strangely enough, using the stone caused Jinhook's karma to rise. A few minutes later, the duo found themselves standing in the middle of a bustling city street. Crowds moved in waves. Neon signs flickered to life, and the air buzzed with energy. Lucia, unfazed by the chaos, casually sipped her drink while Jinhook sat across from her, quietly panicking over how her so-called camouflage magic was completely failing its job. She had assured him earlier that she was using magic to disguise her true appearance and blend into the crowd. Technically, she wasn't lying. Her pointed ears and otherworldly features were hidden, but the illusion of human clothing didn't change the fact that she looked way too perfect. Every passerby stole glances at the stunning woman sitting across from Jinhook, some even outright staring. Lucia, of course, had no complaints. With a sly smirk, She pointed out that her beauty simply couldn't be concealed, even with magic camouflage had its limits. After all, Jin-hook wanted to disagree. Really, he did. But even he had to admit that she was probably the most breathtaking woman he had ever seen. And the worst part, she knew it. Deciding to move on before she got even more smug, Lucia steered the conversation toward something more important, their investigation into karma values. So far, their findings were straightforward. Doing bad things increased karma, and it didn't always take something extreme. Jin-hook himself had gained a single karma point just for breaking his promise to the old dwarf. Apparently, it wasn't just about hurting people. Betrayal, deception, and even irresponsibility could contribute. On the other hand, harm that was consensual, like a fight in self-defense, wouldn't raise karma at all. The exact scale of karma still wasn't clear, but one rule stood out. Once a person's karma exceeded 200 points, they were officially labeled as a villain. At that point, killing them wouldn't even count as murder. It would be classified as self-defense. Essentially, the system stopped seeing them as human. Considering that even Lucia and the old dwarf hadn't reached 100 points, getting past 200 wasn't just a bad habit. It took dedicated villain. Jin-hook had been quietly scanning people throughout the day, checking for any ridiculously high karma values. So far, the most he had seen from a regular pedestrian was somewhere around 50. If they wanted real data, they were wasting their time in a peaceful public area. They needed to go somewhere darker. Thankfully, the city had just the place, the red light district. As night fell, the streets lit up with a kaleidoscope of neon signs, flashy billboards, pulsing music, and the smell of cheap alcohol. This was where the city's real underbelly thrived. As they walked through the streets, a shady-looking barman approached with an exaggerated grin, his eyes lingering a little too long on Lucia. He showered her with compliments, calling her the most stunning lady to grace these parts, and mentioned an ongoing event at his bar. Beautiful women could enjoy up to 5 cocktails completely free. Lucia barely acknowledged him. Without breaking her stride, she shoved him aside and continued walking. Before she could get far, Jin-hook placed a firm hand on her shoulder, stopping her. He suggested they take a moment to enjoy those free drinks, insisting it would be a waste to turn down such a generous offer. The barman, practically glowing with excitement, eagerly led them inside, promising that Lucia would receive the best service the establishment had to offer. After walking all day and encountering only ordinary people with unimpressive karma values, Jin-hook finally found what he was looking for. The barman, an irredeemable villain with a whopping 300 negative karma floating above his head. Settling at the bar, the duo received their drinks and took a sip. The cocktail had a sweet, smooth flavor, something Lucia immediately approved of. Meanwhile, the barman stood a few steps away, quietly snickering to himself. Those two had no idea what they had just consumed. A single drop of the poison-laced liquor was enough to paralyze an average person. There was no escaping it. The moment he saw them relaxing, he signaled a group of thugs waiting in the shadows. They stepped forward, their focus locked on Jin-hook. The plan was simple. Take him out first. Jin-hook, however, barely acknowledged their presence. He simply took another sip and asked if they were sure this was the route they wanted to take. The thugs hesitated for a split second, confused by his calm demeanor. That was when the realization hit. The poison wasn't working. Thanks to his status effect resistance, the so-called fast-acting toxin was nothing more than overpriced juice. Without warning, Jin-hook spun around and delivered a bone-crushing uppercut to the nearest thug, sending him staggering backward. Finally, some action. It had been a while since he could properly stretch his limbs. And these street rats looked like the perfect warm-up. With a smirk, he pulled back and threw another devastating punch, knocking 2 goons out at once. 2 for 1 deal. Not bad. The remaining thugs barely had time to react before he pivoted sharply, shifting his weight for a brutal kick. His foot connected with another thug's face. And with just a single strike, the man collapsed unconscious before he even hit the floor. Meanwhile, Lucia's eyes fluttered open as the effects of the paralytic poison finally wore off. Groggy but alert, she turned her head to assess the situation, only to find a pile of bodies scattered across the bar floor. Confused, she glanced at Jin-hook. He simply shrugged, saying he was just cleaning up some trash. The barman, now visibly sweating, decided it was time to bring out his trump card. With a desperate yell, he signaled for his strongest fighter to step in a towering man with a buzz cut. The brute cracked his knuckles as he removed his jacket, muscles bulging through his shirt. This wasn't just some random thug. He was a hunter. The moment he charged forward with impressive speed, both Jin-hook and Lucia watched him with complete indifference. Jin-hook kept his gaze locked on the approaching brute, analyzing his movements. Meanwhile, Lucia, unfazed, casually reached for another shot of the poison cocktail and asked if he needed any help. Jin-hook waved her off. One more thug wasn't enough to make him break a sweat. Buzz cut, however, was less than amused. The duo was talking about him, as if he were some kind of background character. Enraged, he swung his heaviest punch straight at Jin-Huk's face, only for his fist to be stopped midair by a perfectly timed grab. No matter how much he strained, pushed, or twisted, he couldn't move Jin-Huk an inch. A terrifying realization dawned on him. This wasn't just some random troublemaker. The sheer strength behind that grip meant only one thing. Jin-Huk had to be a hunter, but that didn't make sense. If he was strong enough to be a hunter, why was he wasting his time in a dingy bar fighting low-level criminals? While Buzzcut desperately tried to figure a way out of the situation, Jin-Huk casually tightened his grip ever so slightly until a sickening crack echoed through the bar. A scream of pure agony ripped from Buzzcut's throat as multiple bones in his hand shattered all at once. But Jin-Hyuk wasn't done yet. To shut him up, he followed up with a devastating punch straight to the man's mouth. Buzzcut flew backward like a rag doll, crashing into a line of bar stools. His momentum finally stopped as he slumped against the debris. With every last goon taken care of, only one piece of scum remained the terrified barman. Jin-Huk moved like a wild beast, closing the distance in a flash before locking the man into a chokehold. The villain's windpipe nearly collapsed under the relentless pressure as he clawed at Jin-Huk's arm, struggling for air. But mercy wasn't on the table. Lifting the barman off the ground, he cut off his oxygen completely. The interrogation had begun, and of course, what kind of interrogation would it be without a few warm-up hits? Jin-Huk didn't hold back. Fists rained down without hesitation, painting the bar walls with the barman's blood. By the time he was done, his own knuckles were dripping red, and the man's face was swollen beyond recognition. Only when he was satisfied did he finally get to the real questions. It was obvious this wasn't the barman's first time pulling something like this. To run an operation like this under the radar, he had to have someone backing him up. Yet, even with his face barely intact, he continued to deny any involvement with a bigger power. There was no way a worthless thug like him could repeatedly spike drinks and abduct women without getting caught. And those hired gangsters, they weren't just street-level punks. Someone had to be pulling the strings. Jin-Huk narrowed his eyes, giving the barman one last chance to talk. The villain still stubbornly shook his head. Either he was ridiculously loyal, or whoever was behind this was far more terrifying than the beating he was taking now. There was only one way to find out. Without warning, Jin-Huk grabbed one of the barman's feet and started pulling. The villain thrashed, panic setting in as he screamed and struggled. Jin-Huk, unfazed, calmly explained that he was simply helping him find the motivation to talk. The barman tried to act tough, forcing out a weak declaration that violence wouldn't make him talk. Jin-Huk strongly disagreed, but before he could escalate things further, Lucia stepped in with a look of pure exasperation. She told him to step aside and quit the barbaric, overcomplicated methods. Jin-Huk huffed, but let her take over. Lucia calmly raised her hand, manifesting a mysterious power that shimmered ominously in her palm. She brought it close to the barman's face, and in an instant, his expression shifted. The sheer terror drained away, replaced by a strange sense of ease. Though he remained just as hideous, a few moments of silence passed as the power seeped into his system. And then, out of nowhere, his face twisted into something deranged. His eyes darted wildly as he suddenly blurted out a question, asking if they were sent by an organization called Ultron. His voice cracked with paranoia, insisting that no matter how much trouble Ultron stirred up, it was already too late. Lucia tilted her head. That wasn't the reaction she expected. Sure, she meant to loosen his tongue, but she hadn't planned on making him a complete lunatic. Well, at least it worked. The barman kept rambling, his words spiraling further into madness. He sneered as he declared that Ultron was insignificant. His tyrant guild would wipe out every last one of their enemies. And just like that, the truth revealed itself. The tyrant guild Jin-Huk's eyes darkened. This situation was bigger than he initially thought. Now that the guild's name was on the table, he pressed forward, demanding to know what made them so confident they could massacre their enemies. The barman, practically drooling at this point, let out a crazy chuckle. His answer was simple. They had Alroni's elixir. Jin-Huk frowned. That name meant nothing to him. What the hell was he talking about? A few minutes later, the police arrived to investigate the incident, but by then, Jin-Huk and Lucia had already slipped away. What started as a simple bar brawl had unexpectedly led them to uncover a massive conspiracy, one that reached all the way to the top with a major guild secretly pulling the strings as they hurried through the dimly lit streets. Lucia explained the horrifying truth. Alan's elixir wasn't just some ordinary performance enhancer. It was a drug that doubled the user's stats, but at a horrific cost. To make it, countless young women were sacrificed. She had heard of dark practices before, but never in her wildest nightmares did she think a guild from Earth would be capable of producing something so sinister. It was almost unfathomable, but this wasn't new to her. Back in her world, Orani's elixir had existed too. There, they called it the Queen's Tear, a name that carried a heavy, painful weight. One of her closest friends had been sacrificed for it when they were younger. Years later, after reaching platinum rank, Lukia had personally wiped out the organization responsible for the drug's production. No mercy, no negotiations. She had burned them to the ground. That explained why she had been so grim ever since they left the bar. The moment she heard the name Auron's elixir, she already knew what had to be done. Now the question was, what next? The barman had already spilled that the elixir was almost complete. If they wanted to stop it, they needed to take down the Tyrant Guild before production was finalized. Meanwhile, back at the bar, long after the police had left the scene, a man dressed in all black stood in the shadows, reporting the incident to his superiors. His mask and glasses covered most of his face, but his sharp, calculating tone left no doubt about his efficiency. Based on his investigation, this wasn't an internal dispute. What was strange was that the perpetrators had only killed the barman and left. This wasn't a tactic used by any rival guilds or their usual enemies. Something didn't add up. His orders were clear. Find out who had interrupted their operation. And soon, the masked man was confident whoever the perpetrators were, they wouldn't stay hidden for long.